She sat in silence, and then spoke words that made monarchs and kings tremble, and armies turned completely around. And what she said, very likely, in some form or another, would come true. In this video, we're diving into the powerful mystery of the Pythia, the high priestess of the Oracle of Delphi. She wasn't just a symbol of spiritual authority. She was the voice of Apollo himself. So how did one woman become the most trusted messenger of the gods? And why were powerful men constantly trying to twist her words for their own gain? Stick around, because Delphi's story is deeper, darker, and more divine than you've ever heard. You might think ancient Greece was run by men, and on the surface, absolutely sure. Generals, philosophers, kings. But what about behind the curtain? One woman could stop a war with a sentence, and that woman was the Pythia. Who was the Pythia? The Pythia was the spiritual heart of Delphi, chosen by Apollo himself through sacred signs and rituals. She was always a local woman, one deeply respected in the community. Most of these Pythia were over 50, and they took on the role of being a sacred maiden, a symbol of spiritual purity, untouched by worldly ties. Once elected, her life changed completely. She had to leave behind family, marriage, and personal freedom, throwing herself into this role, dedicating herself entirely to Apollo and his divine messages. But her power didn't come from politics or status. It came from something higher, something holy. The Pythia didn't just walk in and start scrying or prophesying. Every detail of her preparation was steeped in sacred tradition. On days chosen for the prophecy, particularly on the 7th day of each month, the Pythia would begin her sacred preparation, which involved a great degree of ritual. She would bathe in the icy waters of the Castalian spring, a ritual of cleansing the body and soul. She offered laurel leaves to the god, and then chewed them, a symbolic act of devotion and connection to Apollo, her deity. She drank from the sacred Casada spring inside the temple, which was believed to hold the essence of truth. These weren't just mere rituals. They were spiritual alignments, ways to tune herself to the divine frequency of Apollo's voice. When the time came, the Pythia entered the inner sanctum, the Adyton, a sacred chamber located beneath the temple of Apollo. There she sat on a bronze tripod, holding a laurel in her hand, centered in deep prayer. As she opened herself up to the divine, she entered a profound trance. And sometimes the gas that may have come up from the abyss may have helped with this. But she tapped into a special state, and then Apollo spoke through her, not in riddles she made up, but in sacred language shaped by divine energy. Ancient writers described her voice as trembling at that point, her eyes distant, her words powerful, not chaotic, but filled with meaning. This was real. This was spiritual. This was prophecy. So now here's the part most people forget. The Pythia did not work alone. There were temple priests that she worked with, and they often helped deliver the message. So the Pythia delivered the prophecy in her own sacred words directly from Apollo, but the priests, who were men that oversaw the temple and managed the rituals, acted as interpreters for the visitors. They would transcribe her words. Sometimes they might even rephrase her words. Other times they had wrapped them in poetic verse. But here's the thing. The Pythia knew what message she received from Apollo, and she never changed her message. She spoke what Apollo gave her. However, what happened afterwards, well, that's where a human hand entered. And so think kickbacks here. Let's not sugarcoat it. Delphi wasn't just a spiritual center. It was also a political powerhouse. City-states, kings, military leaders, they didn't just come to Delphi with prayers. They came with gold, art, animals, Gifts meant to impress the temple. The priests who handled the political affairs of the temple began to build a certain amount of wealth and influence for themselves. And so, with great power comes great responsibility, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. So, temptation came. There are stories, many stories, of the leaders offering bribes to the temple priests, hoping for favorable interpretations, hoping the priesthood would, and this is air quotes, frame the Pythia's message in just the right way. In other words, the divine message was always pure, but where it left after it came from the Pythia's mouth meant that sometimes human hands would use it for their own gain. The tension between the sacred truth and the political spin shaped the history of Delphi, and maybe even changed the course of entire wars. Although there was corruption around the Pythia's divine connection remained true, and the proof comes from the prophecies themselves. Let's look at some famous prophecies from Delphi. Croesus of Lydia, before attacking Persia, he asked the oracle if he should go to war. The response was, "If you cross the river, a great empire will fall." He attacked, and it was his own empire that collapsed. Was it a misinterpretation? A divine warning ignored? Either way, the prophecy came true. And it was for humans to misinterpret what really was meant. Let's talk about Athens and the wooden wall. Persians threatened to invade, and the oracle said salvation would come from wooden walls. Some thought that meant building barricades, but the Mysticles interpreted it as a fleet of ships. The result? Focusing on their navy, this became a crushing Greek naval victory at Salamis as they routed the Persians. Let's talk about Sparta's battles. Before any major campaign, the Spartans asked the Pythia for guidance. Sometimes she said go, sometimes she said no. And when they ignored her, things rarely ever went well for them. Even with the politics and gold, the Pythia's true messages still broke through. And the reason for that? Well, that's because they came from a higher, more divine source. So the challenge, who do you believe? This brings us to a question of, do you tell the difference between the divine message and human interference? There is a problem of trust here. The Pythia spoke from a place of absolute spiritual integrity. Her devotion to Apollo was unshakable. Her prophecies were not for sale. But the system around her, it was run by men who played fast and loose in politics and were corrupted. Some wanted control. Others wanted influence. And many, well, they wanted to use the Delphi's spiritual authority for their own gain. It's a tale as old as time. The divine speaks truth, and humans try to reshape it. Still yet, the Pythia stood out as a beacon of spiritual clarity in a world that was filled with a lot of power games. We come to the climax, the last breath of the oracle. As centuries passed, the world changed. The Roman Empire rose, and with it, a shift in religious thinking. Eventually, Christianity became the dominant religion in the empire, and the temples of the old gods were shuttered and closed. The oracle gave her final prophecy in 393 CE, when the Emperor Theodosius I outlawed pagan practices. Her last words: "They will come to plunder the temple. The sanctuary of Apollo will fall silent. The voice of the god will speak no more." And just like that, the sacred voice that had spoken for over 1,000 years now fell silent. But it's a legacy that still echoes. Here's the thing. Just because the temple is gone doesn't mean the power is. The ruins of Delphi still stand, a quiet reminder of a woman who once spoke for a god. The idea of a priestess so spiritually in tune that she could predict the fate of nations, well, that still moves us. And the lessons of Delphi, the divine message was sometimes corrupted by the human manipulation. But the eternal quest for truth, that's something that's not going anywhere. The Pythia reminds us that real power doesn't always wear a crown. Sometimes it wears a simple robe, sits in silence, meditates, and listens to the voice of the divine. So, who was the Pythia? Well, we know this was a woman who was completely devoted to the god Apollo. We know that she was a vessel of integrity and true divine prophecy, untouched by politics, untouched by pride. She was surrounded by power-hungry men, but she was never personally controlled by them. Her words outlived kings. Her voice shaped history, and her truth, the pure spiritual truth, still echoes across time. So are you going to tap into your inner oracle in you? You will know by the deep stirring in your heart that you are a gifted soul, blessed by the divine with great foresight and abilities. Continue to ground yourself in nature and always trust that gut feeling that's inside of you. Tap into your inner intuition and use your third eye most carefully. Please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more content.